I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Here's what the chapter looks like. So, as usual, let me go ahead and read it from beginning to end. 76. While alive, the body is soft and pliant. When dead, it is hard and rigid. All living things, grass and trees, while alive, are soft and supple. When dead, become dry and brittle. Thus, that which is hard and stiff is the follower of death. That which is soft and yielding is the follower of life. Therefore, an inflexible army will not win. A strong tree will be cut down. The big and forceful occupy a lowly position, while the soft and pliant occupy a higher place. Okay, interesting. So as you know, the first thing that we would do when we deal with a chapter of the Tao Te Ching is that we will start looking around for the hidden structure, see if we can spot the hidden structure by looking at the characters. So already, just by scanning through the lines, I see some characters that are repetitive from one line to the next. And just to point out some examples, let me just go ahead and show you what those characters are that I'll be talking about. So in the first part of this particular chapter, I have one character, a transitional character. On line 1, you'll see it in the fourth position. On line 2, in the 3rd position. And then again in line 4 and line 5. So that's not too bad. It seems to depict that everything in that first part of it is one section or belongs to one section. Then we have another section down below, and we have some repeating characters here. If you take a look at line 7, the 2nd and 3rd characters in line 7 are repeated down in line 9. And then toward the bottom, in line 12 and 13, you're going to see that there's a couple of characters. There's a character that's been repeated in this couple of lines. So using that as our guide, and we can also reference back into the English, when we understand what it's trying to say, it's much easier to divide it into different sections. So as an example, where it talks about the follower of death and the follower of life, those seem to belong into the same section. And if we were to regard everything below that as one section, everything below that as another section, then we have the beginning, the main body, and then the conclusion. The introductory concept, the main idea, and then the conclusion. So let's take a look. How will we divide this up? And as usual, once the lines are in place, it seems obvious. It seems like, oh, of course that's the way it should be. That's where the division ought to be. If you take a look at the book, if you have my translation, if you bought a copy, you'll notice that the paragraph breaks depict the sections as well. Okay, so notice that 6, 7, 8, 9, these are talking about follower of death, follower of life, exactly like we said. And the section after that is the concluding section. the conclusion, and then before that is the introductory section. Section 1. Okay, so looking at the translation, you can see that there's quite a bit. There's quite a bit of verbiage about the soft and supple, the pliant versus the hard, the rigid, the unyielding, the inflexible, etc. And that's a theme that carries through from beginning of 76 all the way to the very end. Okay, so I think we now have enough of a mental preparation for the overview. I think we're now ready to tackle this particular chapter line by line, in some cases character by character. As I have remarked previously, a little earlier today, this particular chapter is not difficult to understand. It's also not very long. So we should have a pretty easy time, maybe be able to go through the entire chapter and have our complete discussion in one sitting. Let's start with the first two lines. And I want to zoom in on the first 3 characters of line 1. So you'll see that on top, I have highlighted those characters in red, and I've extracted those characters down here for further explanation. Usually when I do that, I either focus on the meaning or I focus on the characters themselves. If I focus on the characters themselves, what I'll do is that I'll provide the pinyin pronunciation, so you have a pronunciation guide, and I will also talk about the meaning. And in some cases, what is especially interesting about the Tao Te Ching is that in some cases, some of the characters have a different meaning in modern times than they do in ancient times. And that's because there's been 2,500 years of linguistic evolution going on between the time of Lao Tzu to today. So language is going to morph into different shapes. Now let's bring our attention back to this particular chapter. So let's talk about the meaning of the 3 characters. The first character is person, human, people. It could be plural. It could be male or female. It's neutral in regards to gender. It is also neutral in regards to singular or plural. So that's 人. That's one of the simplest Chinese characters because it is used so often. And then 之, second character, is the apostrophe S. You can also make it the of, of, but if you make it of, you have to switch around the first part and the last part. Just like, you can say Mary's coat or the coat of Mary. You have to switch around the order. And then the last character there, the third character there, that could be life. It could be living. In this case, I just picked alive. Okay, so if you stick to the literal transcription, you end up with persons alive. What? Okay, what is it trying to say? So the meaning, it can be translated in a variety of different ways. You can translate it as when someone has life, while a person is alive, when a human is living. So different ways to convey the same idea. These are all acceptable. So note that in this particular chapter, the first line is about people, and then the line below the first 2 lines, on line 3, it'll also talk about animals, plants, insects, etc. The 10,000 things. So we'll get there when we get there. For now, we're just focusing on people, and then later on, we will work our way to other living things. Living creatures, things that are alive. Okay, so having looked at the first 3 characters, I also want to focus on this particular character here, the second character in line 2. This character means death, dying, or to die. So I want to make sure that people don't fall into a trap here. It's very easy in the West for people to over-philosophize, okay? You make, and when you over-philosophize, you have a tendency to make the very simplistic original Chinese much more complicated than it has to be. What do I mean by that? Well, in this particular chapter, and this is the same thing carried throughout the entire Tao Te Ching, the assumption is always the same, that being alive, living, having life is good. Death is bad. So this is depicting a positive quality, a positive context. Line 2 is depicting a negative context. I want to make sure that's very clear for you. Now, what do I mean when people over-philosophize this? That's because armchair quarterbacks, and in this case, armchair philosophers, people who really have no idea what they're talking about, who think they are being very profound when they say that, what? Alive is good and being dead is bad? Says who? It's all relative. In some cases, I can see being dead as a good thing. And, you know, being alive might be a bad thing. It all depends. You see, it all depends. Now, this is a very poor attempt at wisdom. And it's making things much more complicated than it has to be. Just accept that in the Tao Te Ching, whenever you get to a reference about someone who's living, who's surviving and thriving, carrying on, that's a good thing. The reason is because when you are alive, you have possibilities. You can do things. You can make changes happen. If things are not exactly right the way you want it, you can make them right. Dead is negative because when you die, that's it. There's no further opportunity for you to make any more changes for the simple reason that you're dead. So dead, the static quality, the static concept is always a negative concept in the Tao Te Ching. And let's not have a very extensive debate about it. It's one of the reasons why Lao Tzu says, listen, you guys should not debate at all. Debate, not a good thing, not a good idea. We end up making ourselves more confused, and we get no closer to the essence of life, which is what we all want. So, alive, good. Being dead, bad. Simple. And beware of the Western trap of over-philosophizing. What do I say Western trap? That's because this is especially prevalent in the Western study of the Tao. So people in Asia will automatically accept, they understand what Lao Tzu is trying to say. They'll just be like, okay, let's move on. You know, living, good. Dead, bad. Let's move on. But in the West, there's usually a philosophy major somewhere who's going to say, well, not necessarily. Well, let me tell you about this author that I read, this philosopher from 17th century, blah, 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 and let me cite you all these passages that will prove my point to you. Sorry, not interested. Let's move on. Okay, so we're not done with the first two lines yet. Let's take a look at the second to last character in line 1. This character is pronounced zhou. This is particularly tricky for a native speaker of English to pronounce. Let me show you the pinyin, and then we'll get to the definition. So the pinyin looks like it should be rao. Okay, well, it's not rao, it's zhou. So it sounds closer to ro, zhou, but there's no exact equivalence in English. So
the best that people can do probably is to go with something like this. So what does it mean? Simple. It's only got one meaning, and that is soft. So this is one of those cases where it is not true that every character in Chinese has multiple definitions. This one has just the one. And you can say that, well, you know, what about the synonyms of soft? Okay, well, those can be the same definition as well, but it's the same thing. Okay, so here's my challenge for the entire group, listening online right now or in person. So what I've done is that I've taken that character, which means soft, and then I've taken another character. This character you may recognize from the upper right-hand corner over here. That's a character for the Tao. So I'm putting them together. What does that say? So in Mandarin, it's 柔道. What is that? Does anyone care to make a guess? I will pause for a minute. So a possible way to answer the question is to say, well, you've got soft, you've got the way. So this is the soft way, right? And that would not be the correct answer. Or you might say, well, you know, let's flip it around. Instead of the soft way, how about the way of the soft? That would also not be the correct answer. So specifically, that term, especially for those of you who are into martial arts or what Bill calls martial science, that it has the literal interpretation of the soft way or the way of the soft, but that is not the true meaning. The real meaning of that term is judo. So judo, you can think of it the other way. Judo is literally the way of the soft. And when you look at judo practitioners, it becomes clear why they will call it the way of the soft. Judo is never about striking power against power. It's always about deflecting. It's always about redirecting and leveraging, etc. It's always about not offering resistance, but use the channeling and the directing in a very effective way. So judo originated in Japan. Now, if you think about the meaning of these two characters, the way of the soft, this gives you a clue that how much influence ancient China had to the culture and background of ancient Japan. So in ancient times, the culture of ancient imperial China has spread to all neighboring regions and countries, including Japan. We see that happening today as well. Think about how the culture of North America is actively being exported to different countries and different regions of the world, primarily by mass media, by television shows, by movies, magazines, images, etc. So just as the US is influential today, so too was ancient China back in its heyday. So this is one application of Tao principles to combat, using the way of the soft, the principles of the soft. It's not the only application. You have heard Bill speak today, so you know that Qigong, Tai Chi, what Bill teaches his students, they are all applications of Tao principles to combat. Okay, so let's continue on. We're now at the end of line 2. We've got 2 characters here. 坚强. Okay, so first of all, let me bring out the pinyin. The pinyin looks confusing. because the rule in pinyin is that you have to join the two syllables together as one word, which is, by the way, not a real smart rule because it causes a lot of confusion. And then you have the Q in there, which a lot of people will be puzzled as to how to sound. So if you were to make an attempt, you might say jiang qian, and that would be very far off. So what it really sounds like is more this way, 坚强. So the Q is always going to be a CH. Sort of in a similar way, like when you see the letter C in Italian, you know it's always going to be pronounced like CH. So what does it mean? Well, it's two characters. The first character means adamant, something that is very hard. The second character means forceful or strong. So something that is hard and adamant and tough and strong, this is usually a positive thing to say in modern Mandarin. So it's a positive term to describe someone being resolute and having strength, 坚强. And it could also be talking about something that is very tough, very durable, etc. In general, it's used as a positive term. But in this ancient context, in the Tao Te Ching, it's anything but positive. So in the ancient context, it's quite different. Not a positive term at all. Here, it describes an inflexible, unyielding toughness. So being tough is not always good. Here is basically saying someone is completely inflexible, won't listen to reason, who's very rigid, and it's a rigidity. The problem is that it's a rigidity that cuts off possibilities. So if someone is in that particular state of being very unyielding and inflexible, they won't listen to what anyone else has to say. They will insist on doing things in one particular way and that way only. And that's what I mean by cutting off possibilities. So remember, 坚强 is not at all positive in the Tao Te Ching. So to be very specific, with these two lines, it's using rigor mortis to make a point that when someone dies, the body stiffens up. And that is a metaphor for how when someone's mind has that same stiffness, well then you can associate that with death. So it's aligned with death. The idea is that, well, maybe your body is alive, but your mind may as well be dead because it is inflexible, because you won't bend for anything. It's your way or the highway. Let's move on. And we are finally beyond the first two lines. Now we get to two very common characters in the study of the Tao, 万物. So in the pinyin, 万物, and this happens to be fairly close to the way it sounds in Chinese, so I'm going to leave it alone. Literally what it means is 10,000 things. So one, the first character literally means 10,000. The second character, 物, means things in terms of living creatures, living things. So here I want to point something out. When you utilize 万物 in the Tao Te Ching, the utilization, the usage can be flexible. Sometimes it's flora and fauna, and what I mean by that is all living things, whether it's whether it's a vegetable, flower, plants of one description or another, trees, or perhaps it's birds, animals running around, maybe insects, etc. Sometimes it points to all living things, and so what I tend to translate is myriad things. Sometimes, like here, it points to living creatures because the plants are handled separately, are talked about separately. So here, here it's only about living creatures, as in animals and insects. We will get to 草木, the other two characters, to make it more inclusive of all living things in an environment, in a natural environment. So here we go. The two characters from line 1, the last two characters from line 1. This one is also kind of tricky because you've got the pinyin that looks like kelmu. That's not what it is. It sounds more like 草木. So don't get thrown off by the design issue of the pinyin system. They never should have used C to say 草. But they did, and it's become a standard, so we don't really have a choice. We have to go along with it. So literally, these two characters mean, the first one means grass, second one means wood. When you put them together, it means all plants. So when you put all four characters together, 万物草木, it means all living things, whether it's animals or insects or plants, grass and trees, all of them, everything in the natural environment, all biological entities. So there's a commonality to all of them, and that is, while alive, they too, like human beings, they're also soft and supple. So we human beings, we're living things as well. We're part of the 万物. We're animals too. So all animals, all plants exhibit softness and flexibility while still alive. Now, you might say, well, I happen to know, some animals that have a hard shell, like the turtle. I happen to know some plants, like trees, that have a very tough bark. So they're not soft, they're very tough. They're very inflexible, yes? Well, the idea is that while they are still alive, you don't have to look very hard to find something that is soft associated with them. So a shell, protective hide or armor, trees, bark for self-protection. You can find the soft quite easily. With a tree, you find it readily in the leaves. Those are very soft. In the animals, even the animals that have a hard shell, while they are alive, they have a part to them, maybe the turtle itself that's hiding inside the shell, that's very soft. So the idea is that as long as you are a living thing, you will have that softness. So being soft is aligned with life itself. So softness is the quality of life. It's an essential quality of life. And not only that, but when we talk about flexibility and suppleness, it's more than just something being soft, like the leaves being soft, the flowers being soft, the skin of an animal being soft. When you have flexibility and suppleness, that can imply a range of other possibilities. So as an example, a plant will grow and it will grow toward the light or the sun. So it has the flexibility to reach out to explore a region that it hasn't been to before, to get closer to a source of light. Flexibility, suppleness, in terms of animals, it's also having to do with motion, movements. So these are all part of the dynamism of life. So the idea is that when you have life, when you are living, it's not just the quality of softness that you have. You have the freedom of movement. You have the ability to do as you please, to go different places, to be flexible in your approach, to go either this way or that way. So this is all part of being dynamic, and it's aligned with life. In death, you don't have those possibilities. So let's talk about death. So previously, when talking about humans, remember I said rigor mortis is being used as a very vivid metaphor to talk about the stiffness of someone being dead. Yes, that's very true. Now, that stiffness, that unyielding lack of flexibility, we can certainly use that to reference a mental aspect of life. Like for instance, if I am inflexible, if I am not willing to give an inch, then I've been afflicted with a condition which is which basically Lao Tzu says is death of the mind, death of the mindset. So in addition to inflexibility, toughness, lack of suppleness, here we add more to that. What do I mean? Well, death doesn't just bring that unyielding toughness and lack of flexibility. There's more. There's the withering, the drying out. So we notice that this happens with all living things. When they are dead, they eventually become very dry. They wither. All the moisture seeps out. They no longer have the ability to retain anything. So they also become very brittle, very fragile, easy to break. So a branch that has become very brittle with all the water, out of it, you can easily break that, and that happens to be really good for firewood. But the idea is that when you are aligned with death, it's not just the lack of flexibility. There's more. Just like we have talked about how when you are aligned with life, it's not just being soft. You also have the dynamism of movement, of choices, of being able to go different places. Here it's the same. This is the flip side of it. When you are dead, when you are no longer among the living, then it's not just you being inflexible, cutting off all possibilities. It's also aligned with being very fragile, being withered. So here's one way to utilize this concept. If somebody has a fragile ego, some arrogant person whose ego is, you find that it's very easy to offend this person. It's very easy for this person to feel insulted. Well, that is a mindset that's much more closely aligned with death than life. That's how you would apply that. And here's the other idea. Sometimes we talk about toughness, like durability. Like in life, you gotta be tough. When the going gets tough, you gotta be tougher. So here, when I talk about toughness like that, I mean being durable, I mean having stamina to last all the storms of life, etc. But here, to be tough is a completely negative quantity, negative concept. You don't want to mix it up with toughness and durability. So the stiffness of death is also accompanied by the fragile brittleness of death. Whereas if you are tough and durable, you're still living and you are not easy to break. It's the very opposite of what we're talking about here. So let's not mix them up. So another way to apply this idea in real life, we talked about ego. Someone with a fragile ego can't really face up to reality, gets very angry, feels insulted, etc. That's one example. Another example is dogma of all kinds. Someone who's very zealous, very fanatical, believing in dogma that's completely inflexible. That dogma can be like dead plants, often dry and brittle. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to ask questions, to tie that person up in little knots. It's very easy to find contradiction or to find where reality simply does not support what they're trying to say or what they would like to be true. So there's a little bit more that I want to cover here. I want to note that when you put this particular chapter into practice in your life, you want to be very mindful of balance and moderation. Why? Well, I'll give you some examples. You want to be flexible, like this particular chapter tells you to be. You want to be aligned with the living, so you want to manifest suppleness and flexibility. True, but you don't want to be so flexible as if you have no ideas of your own, and that you end up becoming a pushover. So think of someone who's always like, where do you want to go for lunch? I don't care, where do you want to go? I don't care, where do you want to go? I don't care, where do you want to go? Okay, that will be carrying your flexibility to an extreme. The Tao cultivator, in seeking balance, having balance in life, would automatically have some suggestions. What do you want to go for lunch? Well, I have some ideas. What do you think about A, B, and C? B sounds really good. Okay, let's go. So balance and moderation are the key. So you want to be yielding, that is, you don't want to be such a difficult person to work with, to talk to interact with. You yield nothing. You want to be yielding. You want to take what the other person says into consideration, and if the other person is justified in what they're saying, you are prepared, you're ready to change your mind about something. So that is the moderation of yielding. Now, you don't want to be so yielding that whenever someone else has a different opinion, you cave in right away. Maybe that idea is not such a great idea. You still want to be able to champion the right course of action, regardless of what that is. So in the example that I'm using now, we want to go for lunch. Well, I got some ideas. What do you think about A, B, and C? Well, I think D and E will be better. Then, depending on the situation, there are times when the Tao cultivator would say that, those are pretty good choices as well. Okay, let's go to one of them. But there are times when the Tao cultivator, using moderation, might say, well, I happen to know that D failed the health inspection and E is about to close up. So those are not good choices. So the idea is to be mindful, is to know what you're getting into, is to be moderate at all times when you're using the ideas in this particular chapter. So I would like to provide a mental imagery to help you keep this idea from 76 in mind. So I always get comments like this. Well, if you are yielding and flexible all the time, others may see you as weak, and then they will exploit your weakness. They will take advantage of you. So what I would say is that to be a true cultivator of the Tao is like being grass. Grass may seem weak, may seem insignificant, but beneath that superficial appearance is massive strength. What do I mean by that? Well, think about the cracks in concrete. When you go outside, when you go to the sidewalk, when you look around, chances are you will see that the concrete on the sidewalk has been cracked. And peeking through, you will be able to find grass. So use that as your mental imagery. Is it weak? No, I would say it's actually very strong, but it may appear to be weak for those who do not understand the Tao. Okay, we're making pretty good progress. So let's talk about the hard and stiff. So remember, 坚强, those two characters, it may be a very positive quality in modern Mandarin, in everyday speech, but in this ancient context, it's a very negative quality. So if you look at everything together, 坚强 is the follower of death. And once again, remember, death, negative. Death is bad. So 坚强 in this particular context is all about, one, people who cannot see perspectives other than their own. It's my way or the highway. I got to do it this way because I say so. That is being 坚强, but not in a positive way. 坚强, like being stubborn, being unreasonably stubborn. Two, people who know they are wrong but refuse to admit it. They may even double down. So this is very common, and this is a little bit different from number one, as you can see. Number one is the insistence of doing things in a particular way. Number two is to refuse that you have made a mistake, that you have spoken erroneously, and that is another manifestation of 坚强. Number three, people who lack the ability to consider alternatives or unconventional solutions. So this I see all the time. When people say, well, we have to do it this way because this is the way that we have always done it. And if I were to ask, yeah, but why? Why is it done this way? I don't know. It's just the way that it's always been done. So we have to stick to that same way. Yeah, but why? I don't know, but we have to do it that way. So that's another manifestation of 坚强. And again, it cuts off possibilities. It's aligned with death. And lastly, and perhaps the most important, 坚强 would also be depicting people who don't have the flexibility to change with the times. So think about how quickly times are changing for all of us. We need the flexibility to align ourselves with life and to be able to respond to changing conditions of the world. But those who are aligned with death lack that ability to change with the times. So that's part of what this chapter is talking about. Let's look at more. So specifically, Lao Tzu says, people who are like that, they are followers of death. Let's break down those characters so we can see what they are. So the three characters, the first one means death. The second one, same as before, is the apostrophe S. And then the last character there, that's a follower, an apprentice, or a disciple. It could be any one of the above. So here I've picked follower. So note, here I want to talk about what it means to be a follower of death, because this can indeed be misunderstood. What do you mean, follower of death? Well, first of all, we already know that death is a negative thing in the context of the Tao Te Ching. To be a follower of death does not mean to follow a death deity or the personification of death. So that's not what it means by being a follower of death. I'll get to what it really does mean in just a moment. Here, I want to show you, this is Thanos. He is a comic book character. He's about to be really big. He is going to be the major villain in the next Avengers movie. The thing about Thanos is that he's a worshiper of death, and you see behind him is the comic depiction of death. Here, depicted as the Grim Reaper, but in other depictions of the comic books, depicted as a beautiful woman. So the reason why Thanos wants to destroy the world, the galaxy, the universe, etc., is to please death. He is a follower of death in that sense. But in the Tao Te Ching, when we say a follower of death, we don't mean Thanos. That's not what we mean at all. So to be a follower of death also does not mean to be in a death cult. And, like a suicide pact, or to, in a cult to kill people. That's a follower of death? No, that's not what it means here at all. So, to clarify, follower of death has nothing to do with personification of death, death deity, worshipping of death in any way that would lead you to kill, etc., either yourself or someone else. So what does it mean to be a follower of death? What it does mean is to be eliminated. You follow death into oblivion because you cannot adapt to change. Wow. That's what it really means. When you follow death, you go nowhere. You head toward oblivion. And the reason why is because you can't change. Okay, so I think everybody's clear on that. Let's move on. I think we probably have enough time for one more slide before we have to jump to the concluding slides for today. So let's talk a little bit more about followers of death. And I say that this is especially relevant to all of us today. Why? Because just look at all the change that's happening. Even just in the last few years, things are changing so dramatically. So the world today does not resemble the world that I grew up in. There are so many things that are completely different now. Let me give you some examples. So, what are some of the changes that we have already observed in our world? By looking at these changes, I hope to get everyone to start thinking about how things are continuing to change, and therefore, we must be followers of life. We must be able to change and adapt. So think about this sequence. We used to have cameras that had negatives, and then we had to develop the negatives. Then that transitioned into digital cameras, so we no longer have film that we need to develop. And now, a lot of people don't even have digital cameras anymore because it's already built in to the smartphone. The smartphone actually has incredible resolution. It actually has all kinds of features, stabilization, burst mode to take a whole bunch of pictures at once. It has the ability to make a video recording. It has tons of storage for hundreds, if not thousands of images and videos that you record. Wow, things have definitely changed. Is anyone still using film cameras? Well, perhaps professionals who have a very specific need, very specific professional need in a niche for that. And they find that film becomes increasingly more expensive, while the rest of us, the vast majority of people, 99% or more, have moved on to using the smartphone as your digital camera. So in a way, you can say that, well, because it's melded into the function of the smartphone, it has disappeared. It has, quote unquote, disappeared. Something that used to exist separately as an object is no longer existing. It's being combined with other stuff. So here's an obvious example. We always used to have vinyl records, albums. I had them when I was younger. That, later on, I transitioned to cassette tapes, and for a while I had both, vinyl records and cassette tapes. And for a while I had vinyl records, cassette tapes, and CDs. So we all remember what happened when music CDs were first introduced. The digital sound is so incredibly clear that the old-fashioned vinyl records, cassette tapes, mostly was no competition. So we made that switch very, very quickly. Then we ended up with a whole bunch of MP3 players, thanks to the iPod from Apple Computer, and then later on quickly followed by many other devices. And in a way, the iPod and other MP3 players have also disappeared because it is possible for you to use your smartphone as a very good MP3 player. Not only that, that's probably going to go away too, because nowadays when you want to listen to something, you can just call it up, from Pandora, from YouTube, from some music service. So you don't even need to hang on to the MP3 files anymore. It's always there when you want it. So there again, it's disappearing. It's vanishing. It's changing. So other examples are very similar. So if you think about the movies that we watch, we used to go to theaters all the time to watch movies. Later on, we have video cassettes, VHS. We can watch that at home. Later on, we had, after that, we had DVDs, which have much better quality than the videotapes. So sure, we'll watch that instead. Wow, digital quality, there's no comparison. But then there's Blu-ray, high def, and now nobody wants to watch DVDs anymore because they're too low res, they're too blurry. And moving on, there's going to be 4K, there's going to be video services. There's Hulu, there's Netflix, there's all kinds of services on the internet causing all of that video cassettes, DVDs, etc. to also vanish. So again, I'm depicting a world of incredible change, constant change. And it's the same with books as well. Books go into e-books, and probably in the future, it becomes a service. Subscribe to a particular service and read all the books you want. Any book, big collection, etc. So think about all the changes that people have begun to take for granted, and think about the way it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Wow, things sure aren't the same today as they used to be, and we know that the pace of change is only going to accelerate. So as remarkable as all these changes have been, there's more. There's more coming up. So we all have to be ready to let go, not be the follower of death, but be the follower of life. So on that particular note, I want to jump ahead. What are some of the ideas we can take away from this chapter? Well, here are my suggestions. I have 3 suggestions for everyone to consider. Number 1, being ready for the future. So this is exactly the point where I ended today's talk. We have already seen massive change taking place in the world. What's next? Are you ready for that? Bringing the soft into your interactions, and by that, I mean your communications, your actions toward other people, the work that you do at the workplace, your attitude, your behavior, all can use the touch of softness. So specifically, I want to ask everyone to be careful of the tendency, if any, to quote unquote put your foot down. Like, I'm putting my foot down. This is, that's it. No more discussion. I'm putting my foot down. So remember, sometimes that is necessary when you practice moderation, Sometimes it just makes you seem extremely stubborn, perhaps alienating people, or you say, I'm going to lay down the law, no more blah, blah, blah. Or, in my opinion, even worse, cut people off. Before they have a chance to finish saying what they want to say, you become very impatient, cut them off. Yeah, I know what you were going to say. No, we're not going to do that. Okay? We're not going to do that. Cut them off. That is so incredibly rude. It is not the soft. It's contrary to the Tao. Lastly, reducing your footprints in the world. Here, I mean a lifestyle of minimizing what you do and the clutter that is already in your life. Minimize, discard. Because less baggage means you can be much lighter on your feet. Why be lighter on your feet? Because you can react so much better. You can change course so much better when you are lighter on your feet. So these are some suggestions from 76. I hope that they will be helpful to everybody in the week ahead. Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，持架3鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，3鞠躬，持架各位点传世1鞠躬，接班1鞠躬。We are done, everybody. Thank you so much.